I voted to leave.
Why?
The false promises of, now we're saving all this money from pumping it into the EU economy where it's a black hole. We'll be spending that on, you guys, the communities and businesses, and it was just a bunch of lies. Boris had his best.
The first ever Farage at Large we did was in Port Talbot in South Wales, and I talked there about steel.
People bought into a story, and the story was told so well that it had so many hidden agendas in it that people didn't see it, and now the reality is coming home.
Steam has risen from the chimneys behind me for the last 100 years at the Steelworks in Port Talbot, and for the first time ever, it's going to be extinguished.
The breaking news that thousands of jobs are at risk at the UK's biggest steelwork plants.
And news that's been described by unions here as a crushing blow.
Awful news for people who live in South Wales. 3,000 jobs have been lost.
Now the question is why? Well, no one seems to know. If you turn on GB News, they're going to tell you it's net zero and climate change policy.
Once the fiery heart of industry, now shivering under the icy gaze of net zero. Look at that view.
So the media aren't addressing why it's closing down. The truth has to be out there somewhere. So I've spent the entire weekend in Port Talbot. I've spoken to people that have worked in the steelworks their whole lives, local councillors, MPs and economists, to find out the truth as to why this plant closed down.
Councillor Rob Jones is the leader of Neath Port Talbot Council. Your thoughts, Rob?
It's catastrophic news for the community. I've been out this morning walking the streets, speaking to the shopkeepers in the Taibach area where I represent, and everyone is walking around with a weight on their shoulders.
But of course this is politically driven, isn't it? In the sense that Labour may be the national government in the next 12 months. You've got a Welsh government that is Labour, and your party's desperate to make us greener, as are the Conservatives. And this makes us greener.
I think one of the hidden reasons here is the lack of investment by successive governments from the 1980s that have not invested in the steel industry to make it a viable and profitable organisation. We are going to be the only nation that cannot produce steel and will be reliant on other people and the imports.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rob Jones, the leader of the Labour group at Neath Port Talbot Council.
Rob, thanks so much for coming on, thinking of you and the town. Really appreciate you spending time with us.
Okay, thanks very much.
Take care, mate.
Bye.
So the news has just broken officially.
They haven't got a clue. It's been pushed as a green thing. This is nothing to do with green. This is all about bloody investment for that plant. They haven't got a clue. They're not asking the right questions to the right people in order to get the right bloody answers.
Also important to mention that we're hearing from government sources that the deal that has been put on the table by Tata Steel now, the one that looks like it's going ahead, officially anyway, the deal has saved thousands of jobs according to our government sources.
I am not going to speak to anyone today that's going to be happy and joyous with this news. It's as simple as that. This affects everyone. And that programme just said, well, the UK government are investing £500 million to save jobs. They are not concentrating on the 18,000 jobs that will be lost because they're investing in green steel that won't produce what is required for this company and for this country. Oh, I give up.
But now the question is why? Why, when the entire world media is here, none of them are talking about why the plant has closed down. This is a significant moment in British manufacturing. The last steelworks in Wales has shut down, the biggest steelworks in Britain. I want to know the actual economic reason as to why Tata closed down. So I reached out to an economist at Swansea Metropolitan University. He knows all about Port Talbot, he knows deeply the Welsh economy, and he's going to give me a better idea as to why this is happening.
Where we are now is still a direct descendant of Thatcherism. We have given up our basic industries. Our railways are run by Germany. Our infrastructure projects are very often imported from places like Spain and China. We've lost this grip on the idea of industries of strategic importance, and the Thatcherites and their descendants have simply flogged them off. Harold Macmillan said we are selling off the family silver, but what we see in Port Talbot today, as in hundreds of other town centres across the UK, is the direct results of an ideological austerity. So the European Union as a whole can be an economic power on a par with the United States, with Russia, Brazil and China. The European Union still has that sway. Britain doesn't. Britain is separated. So it loses the economies of scale. It also loses the ability to specialise, which means it has to try and do everything. And it can't do everything, and we are finding now that we can't afford to make basic steel. We can't go to our European neighbours for help on that. We have to go to India, and ultimately we'll have to go to China. So the United Kingdom government has surrendered its ability to provide ourselves a very basic item that British industry needs. So it's the opposite of taking back control. We've lost control, and ultimately that seems to mean that the skills and the technology that we've got in Port Talbot is going to go to waste. What's happening now is that, having left the European Union, Britain is having to specialise in its grades of steel. There are 3,000 plus different grades of steel, but they all depend on the basic virgin steel that comes from blast furnaces like the one we have at present in Port Talbot. If we were still in the EU, then we could trade basic steel amongst 28 countries. If basic steel is unprofitable, we could all club together as 28 countries to subsidise that unprofitable stuff which is so essential to other industries. Maybe Port Talbot would be the specialist in that line of steel, or maybe it would be specialist in something else, but there would be a role for a steel industry in each of the EU countries. Having left the EU, we're on our own. And what's going to happen in the long term is that for basic steel, we're going to find ourselves dependent on India, and maybe ultimately the right-wing free market of little island protected borders Britain is going to be dependent on the communist dictatorship of China, which is not a good idea.
The failure of levelling up, the austerity, the lack of investment have made people here feel absolutely isolated from the political system and furious with the government. This morning, walking down the beachfront, I spoke to some locals about the past and what living in Port Talbot used to be like.
I was around when the mines closed. The valleys had a hell of a hard time. It was awful, to be honest. Brexit has put a whole new it's brought a new game into play, and it's not for the best. The biggest problem we're getting now is, where do we sell our goods? We're only a small island. We can't survive by itself. And I don't care what people say, independence is not always the way to go. I think everything was painted, like the roads were going to be painted with gold. It was like looking around the idea of London in the 1960s. Everything is paved with gold if we leave the EU. That was Nigel Farage and his dream. Needless to say, we're still not paved with gold, and we're worse off. We got more potholes now, let alone gold slabs in a row. We got more potholes than we've ever had.
It's been almost impossible to speak to any of the steelworkers because Tata doesn't allow employees to talk about the company in any capacity. However, James worked at the Steelworks for the last couple of years, and he doesn't really care anymore because they're laying off the jobs anyway. He says that Brexit is the main reason for it closing down. He understands the economic reasons, and he actually regrets his vote.
I'm an apprentice. I work in a power plant. I love to stay in Steelworks. I love to be given the opportunity to carry on working there. But I just don't know at the moment.
The Tories were the ones that promised to save steel.
Yeah. But nothing's come to fruition. There's not a lot of opportunities left in this area.
Voted Conservative in the past.
Yes.
Where?
I think it was Brexit, did. Yes.
What was the main reason?
Well, there's, you see, I see the European Union, there's a lot of them are unelected, or I don't know if you know your local European, when we was in it, your local European MEP. Nobody does.
So you voted Brexit then. How do you feel about that vote now? Have you done it differently?
Probably would have done it differently now, the way the world's going, because it's a lot more unstable than it was 7 years ago. You see, you think of the Tory party, you think of a party who are concerned with business, and they're the party that does business. So financially, you know, the party, you think that. And you see Labour as some sort of socialist and the trades unionist sort of party, and you think you get more done with the Tories, and that hasn't happened. They haven't created any jobs.
Why do you think?
Like a lot of these, the people who work there, they've been there 30 odd years. I say they might have children who are about to go embark on like in a career in the industry, and now they can't. So they feel like their future's been ripped away. They feel like their offspring's future's been ripped away. So it's rock bottom.
I think people bought into a story, and the story was told so well that it had so many hidden agendas in it that people didn't see it, and now the reality is coming home.
Well, we're looking back at the people who don't live in this area, the ones who come from away, they're all making promises.
The first ever Farage at Large we did was in Port Talbot in South Wales, and I talked there about steel.
Walk the walk instead of just talking the talk. Yeah, we get them all down here. We've had Farage wandering around telling us that all the boats will be coming into Aberafan before long, and they'll be taking your jobs in the steelworks.
Who are the people who really lose out?
Oh, it's about the public. It's each and every person that's in the community. Each and every person in this community will suffer as a result of what's going to take place in Tata. Each and every person in every community.
A huge number of the steelworkers I spoke to off camera have all voted leave. That's what they said to me. For a myriad of different reasons. But one thing's for sure, most of them regret their decision. Did you vote to leave or stay?
I voted to leave.
What? Why?
As Richard said, it was the false promises of, you know, now we're saving all this money from pumping it into the EU economy where it's a black hole. We'll be spending that on, you know, you guys, the communities and businesses, and it's just a bunch of lies. Boris had his best.
What do you think should be done now? Do you think we should rejoin or just try to fix it? Or what do you think now? What happens now?
I always felt there would be a period of 2 to 3 years hardship after leaving Brexit. I felt that moving forward we will become a stronger country, but I can't see it.
Majority of locals voted to leave in this town. Why do you think that is?
Oh gosh, I wish I knew that answer. I would probably be in Parliament myself.
And so what were you talking about back then was about how politicians were making promises again around the referendum?
That weren't, they were not keeping any promises whatsoever, were they? I think that's the impact that nobody votes anymore, because for people, you know, we vote in certain areas and for certain politicians, but there's just nothing happening. When that steam stops coming out, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen or what's going to become of us all. I'm not going to lie.
I've just driven past here, and I don't know how many times I've driven past here. Thousands of times. And I just realised that with this announcement today, the smoke and the steam that are coming from this place is going to stop. The blast furnaces run 24/7. They've got to, otherwise they collapse. How many times am I going to drive past here and still see the smoke and steam coming out of here that I've always taken for granted? that shows that people are working in here, that shows that people have a living in here. And that's all going to stop some point this year. It's a very sad day.